Mike's a good guy. He's one of my closest friends. I've watched teletracking go from an idea in his office 20 years ago to you here today. So I've watched him evolve an idea and a strategy that obviously is pretty successful, and I think it's going to be very successful before it's over. But one of the things I learned from him was to enjoy the ride while you're on it. It's not just about accumulating wealth. It's about helping others and doing the right thing and allowing your life to be something meaningful, not just to you, but to others around you. I happen to believe in that philosophy. I happen to believe in him. And in many ways, I believe in you guys. I talked to Mike, our friend, and said, look, the thing that really struck me about the teletracking crowd, they all look like they want to be here. They, for real. I do, a fair number of corporate presentations. Most of them are like have this draconian look on their face. It's a drag. The speakers are a drag. They have to suffer through this to keep the boss happy. But there's a very different energy in this room. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that comes because the leader sets the standard and people go where the leader goes. So in that regard, I'm very honored to be here with you. I run a school in Pittsburgh, a place called Bidwell Training Center, Manchester Craftsman's Guild. It's my autobiography. Once upon a time, I was a public school kid, flunking out of public school, and an art teacher actually saved my life. His name was Frank Ross. I was walking down the corridor of our high school. The art room door was open, and Mr. Ross made a great big old ceramic bowl. Well, I'm from the inner city. I never saw pottery made. So I'm standing there at the door with my mouth open. And he turned around and says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, man, what is that?" He said, "Well, that's ceramics." I said, "Well, I want you to teach me how to do that." He says, "Well, get your homeroom teacher to sign a piece of paper, says you can come here and you're good to go." So for the remaining 2 years of high school, I cut all my classes. But I was smart enough to give the teachers whose classes I was cutting the pottery I made. And they gave me passing grades, and that's how I got out of the place. By the way, that's a true story. And Frank said, "Look, I'm leaving here to take a job at a college, and I'm not going to let you die like your buddies on the street. I got to know that you're going to be okay." So mainly to get Mr. Ross off my back during my senior year, every time I see the guy, he says, "Have you applied to college yet?" "No, I haven't." So I got tired of that, so I got an application to the University of Pittsburgh, and I filled the thing out in pencil and put it in an envelope, put it in the mail, and thinking that'd be the end of it. Well, Pitt sent me back this letter. It says, "You got to pass something called the Scholastic Aptitude Test." Well, I'd never seen the Scholastic Aptitude Test. It was multiple choice back then, so I kind of marked the thing up, flunked the test. So I got into Pitt as a probationary student. Well, I'm very pleased to tell you, I graduated from Pitt with honors, and now I'm a trustee of the University of Pittsburgh, of the college that let me in on probation. And I got up, I was invited to be the commencement speaker. So I got up in front of 13,000 people and I said, "Don't give up on the poor kids. They might end up being the commencement speaker." And basically that's the story for a couple of minutes. I believe that people are born into the world as assets, not liabilities. It's all in the way that you treat people that drives their behavior. And just because you're poor from the inner city is not the whole story. Those are just adjectives. And if Mr. Ross had not recognized that in spite of the fact I was poor, came from a tough neighborhood, black kid from the inner city, 4 grades, I'm another one of my buddies who didn't make it to the class reunion this year because we're dead or in the penitentiary. But I've decided to cast my fate with the people in that neighborhood. My whole life story is 6 city blocks. I was born in that neighborhood, I'm gonna die in that neighborhood. And part of the reason is I wanted to let the kids know you can bring the world to your neighborhood. And now that I'm giving speeches all over the place and meeting presidents and this and that, it's very important that these children see that I still come to work in the neighborhood, because I view them as people who populate one of the most important places in the world, which is where I live. So I set up Manchester Craftsmen's Guild in 1968 to start working with kids in the streets during the riots, kids like myself. I had a little tent ministry. I lived in a row house. I was in a sleeping bag. I built a kiln out back and started dragging kids in off the street to save their souls with clay. And I started hearing back from the school system, the kids were starting to show up more regularly. And after a couple of years, I figured it out. There wasn't anything wrong with the kids. The school system was the problem. The kids were fine. They needed clay. They needed somebody to believe in them. And with that insight, I set up Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. Bidwell, on the other hand, was the old funky-dunky poverty program. And the guys who built Bidwell screwed it up pretty good. And they were looking for some fool to take it over. They said, what is that nutty artist, Bill Strickland? He thinks he's Moses. He'd probably take the job. And back then I did think I was Moses, to lead all the poor to the promised land, all that. So I took over Bidwell in 1972 in a warehouse with holes in the floor and holes in the roof. And the guys were on their knees gambling when I showed up for the first day of my Brooks Brothers suit. And they looked right up at me and they went right back to gambling. I said, Miss Jones, when I showed up here today, the guys were on their knees gambling. I didn't recognize the game they were playing. She said, oh, they were taking bets on how long you last in the job. That was the student body. And the SWAT team was in and out of that place every couple of weeks, dragging guys out of the building. My first executive act, I bought the beer and I bought the paint. I said, anybody doesn't show up to paint this building is fired. One guy didn't show up and I fired him. I said, we ain't living like this, man. If I'm going to devote my life to this work, we're going to start looking like the solution and not the problem. And it starts with this paintbrush. It's easy to give this speech now because I got a fancy building and all that I'm going to show you. When you're down to your last prayer and there's no sunlight and no hope, that's when you really find out what you're all about. And that's why it's very important that you understand where I started, not necessarily where I ended up. So Bidwell is a vocational school, and I built this thing, and we take people everybody's given up on. Homeless folks, at-risk kids, unemployed adults, welfare people, and we turn their lives around vocationally and get them working in the community productively. So it's arts for public school kids and vocational education for inner city people. Now, one of the things that Mr. Ross did with us, y'all ever heard of a fellow named Frank Lloyd Wright? He did okay in the architecture business. And Mr. Ross took a bunch of us black kids to see this thing called Falling Water. It's a very famous house just south of Pittsburgh. So here's this Italian guy with these black kids in his van. And you get out through the woods, you come out this clearing, and there's this fabulous house sitting up on a boulder with a creek running right down to the middle of the house. I looked at that and I said, in my neighborhood, we spend time trying to keep the water out of the house. This guy's got a creek running right down to the middle of the place. That's an interesting way of looking at water, man. The other thing that really fascinated me was the light. And I said, if I can get that light into my neighborhood, I'm halfway home. So I committed myself to building a Frank Lloyd Wright building before I left the planet. And I did, I'm gonna show it to you. I hired one of his students to build that. This is my concept of what a school for poor people is supposed to look like. This happens to be, as Mike Samaj will tell you, the toughest, highest crime neighborhood in Pittsburgh. But what you will not see in our building is a metal detector or security cameras. We have millions in equipment. We haven't had an incident in 28 years. Nothing. No race, no drugs, no alcohol. When you come visit, remind me, as I've done with Mike, I'll show you my old high school. It's still up the street. Steel doors, metal detectors, bars in the window, and the last time I saw it, the K-9 unit was sitting outside in a police van. That's what kids experience going to school. That's not school, that's prison. This is a school. No one is discouraged, no one is turned away, and everybody's doing fine. That's the entrance to the building. We have fabulous artwork throughout the building. It's all my taste. Well, because I raised all the money. I said, when y'all raise the money, we'll put your artwork on the wall. One of the worst things that happens to you when you're poor, you don't look at the sun anymore because you're giving up hope. So one of the things you will notice, even in winter in Pittsburgh, the building is flooded with light. Light is hope. And these poor folks come to a school that's lit up every day in celebration of life. That's how you teach it to people, by living it. So the building is very optimistic and very hopeful. By the way, there's no anti-theft system on any of the artwork. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in artwork these days. We haven't lost anything in 28 years. No magic markers, no graffiti, no theft, zero. Why? Because people have a reason to support the facility rather than destroy the facility, because the facility has become a part of their life. That's at Christmas time. This is what a school's supposed to be looking like. One of the principles I want to make sure you understand, you can't give it if you're not living it. If you believe in Christmas, look like Christmas. I defy you to show me 10 public schools in America that look like that at Christmas time. And nobody's given me a good reason why not. Well, what we believe in is life is worth living, and if you can do it in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, you ought to be able to do it anywhere. So when the poor kids and the at-risk people and the homeless folks come to this place, they get into the spirit of Christmas time because we're all celebrating it during that season. That's our boardroom. I commissioned a Japanese cabinet maker to do 60 pieces of furniture for our school. I hired a guy from Kyoto, Japan. In the old days, we were a building trades program, bricklaying and carpentry and stuff. And a friend of mine went to Japan and married this guy and brought him back to Pittsburgh. And she called me up and says, I understand you're teaching carpentry over there. I said, yeah. She said, well, my husband's a woodworker. I was wondering if you'd give him a job. I said, well, bring the guy over. I'll talk to him. Well, he didn't speak any English. And you can imagine how much Japanese I speak. But I found out he had studied with a guy named George Nakashima, who's one of the great Japanese-American woodworkers. And I was hip to Nakashima. I said, tell your husband I'm going to give him a job. And she did in Japanese. She told me about. Said, please tell Mr. Strickland I'm so grateful for the job, but I apologize that my English is so poor. I said, well, you tell your husband the students he's going to work with don't speak English either, so they ought to get along fine. And I hired the guy, worked out all right. We got 60 pieces out of it for our school. That's black walnut. The reason we put the furniture in the school is the children deserve the furniture. Because I won something called a MacArthur Fellowship. It's a big deal. They give you a big plaque and stuff. And the reason I won it, I figured out the cure for cancer of the spirit. I'm showing you. It's food and it's sunlight, it's Christmas, it's celebration, and it's hope. You put those ingredients together, you can cure cancer of the spirit every day of the week. Do y'all eat Heinz ketchup? Well, eat more of it. I don't know where your politics are about ketchup, but I stand with ketchup. In the old days before I got real sophisticated, I had a cardboard box built in my school. They had it in a garbage bag. I'm dragging this box over Pittsburgh trying to raise money to build this center. And I got called into the office of United States Senator John Heinz, who was the heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune, which was like going to see the Wizard of Oz, because he had about 600 million at the time, and I had about 60 cents. He said, man, you've done a great job with the black folks and the inner city white kids and the ex-steel workers, and we understand you want to build a new school. I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, well, you could really help the Heinz Company's affirmative action goals out if you'd add a culinary program to your new school when you get it built. That way we could hire some black folks, solve the affirmative action problem. I said, well, Senator, I'm really, really reluctant to go into a field I don't know anything about, but I promise you, man, give me the money, we'll build the school, I'll come back in a couple of years, and we'll get that culinary program going just like you asked. He sat real quietly. He said, well, what would your answer be if I said I'd give him $1 million? I said, Senator, it appears that we're going in the food trading business. This is what we built. And these guys are engaged big time. We can train people to a 4-star restaurant standard in 12 months with no background in food preparation. These are all the guys everybody's given up on, remember? That's the point of the story. We bring in chefs from all over the world who do product presentations. Why? You want the kids to be part of the world, you got to bring the world there so they know what it looks like. That's what happens at the school. They end up discovering friendships and their commonality. That's not required, that's voluntary. That's lunch at the school. Seriously, that's what we feed the students. We've discovered it's very difficult to teach people when they're hungry. So the answer is give them something to eat. But since we don't do fast food, we do gourmet food, every student is eligible to have a gourmet lunch every day of the week. We discovered that it's good for their stomachs, it's better for their heads. I wanted to take the stigma out of food. Good food's for everybody on the planet, not just rich kids. And if people tell you that you can't serve poor kids gourmet food, send them to Pittsburgh. I've been doing it for over 25 years. You just have to want to do it bad enough. People on welfare who supposedly have no sophistication are doing that quality of presentation in 6 months. Nobody can tell me what I don't see every day when I go to work. This is real, man. We're making this up. That's Chef Keith. He teaches production cooking. Marriott hires a lot of our guys. In fact, another company you're working with, Sodexo. Sodexo is one of our big recruiters. That's our dining room. Reminds you of your high school cafeteria, right? Yeah, well, we do a lot of black tie functions at our school, Medical Association, Engineer Society. Mike's been over for a couple of events, and this is going on in the inner city of Pittsburgh. My point is that we have to change the inner city to look like that picture. We're late in the game. The other thing we noticed, the black folks and the white folks are eating together voluntarily. What we've discovered is, you build a world-class center, people see themselves as the same, not different. So we got that problem figured out. We train pharmaceutical techs. You guys are all healthcare people, so we train a lot of these folks for UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and West Penn Allegheny. I discovered the other day, we did a count, we have 500 employees now working for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center that were trained at my center over the last 10 years. This guy's working for the Water Treatment Authority. He was down to his last unemployment check when he enrolled in this program. He's doing about $50,000 a year with full benefits. He's out of poverty, and he ain't coming back. Look at the equations on the board behind these students. These are supposedly people who can't learn technology or science. Well, they learn technology and science, fine. But you have to build a world-class center and set the bar high so they can rise to the standard. I have 60 research technicians working for the Bayer, now Covestro chemical company in Pittsburgh, 60. And they're doing pretty advanced applications. So we now know that this thing works. And we train medical coders and medical billing people for the medical industry. These are two of our students. And that's our library. Unfortunately, I have people in this library with high school diplomas that they can't read. Not one of them, I got a lot of them. And you got to ask yourself the question, how is it possible to be in the United States of America at this late date, and we got people walking the streets with diplomas in their pocket that they can't read? The answer is in the reimbursement system. The schools get reimbursed by how many people they push out, not how many people read. Well, if they don't read at my center, I don't sign the diploma. Everybody's reading, they're doing fine. And you said if you're not reading, you also aren't working. There's a direct correlation between the two. But the good news is we can get people high school equivalent in a year, basically. This is the arts program. Remember, I'm the black guy from the 60s making pottery? How many of you were even alive in the 60s? Raise your hand. Okay. One time, nobody raised a hand. I got to check out who I'm talking to, but the jokes don't work. Well, I was back there during the disturbances. We called them what they were. Back then they were riots, and guys were getting shot, and I wanted to help out. So I knew something about ceramics, and the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese, named Robert Appleyard, had heard about me, and he used to give me checks out of the bishop's discretionary fund, and that's how I got Manchester Craftsman's Guild set up. So this was actually set up by a church to work with kids in the streets. That bishop was a very, very extraordinary man. We became very close friends. And he died a number of years ago. And his wife called me and asked if I would speak at his memorial service. So I got up to speak at Bishop Appleyard's memorial service, and his wife took my hand. She said, "I want you to know the bishop cried like a baby when he saw your name in the New York Times with your first presidential appointment." I've had 3 presidential appointments: Bush 41, Bush 43, and the current President Barack Obama. 3 presidential appointments for a kid who got into college on probation. Don't judge the book by the cover. The other thing that the bishop taught me before he died, wherever there are Episcopalians, there's money in very close proximity. And I got the wealthy Episcopal Church, St. Michael's, which happens to be the Mellon Church, like Mellon National Gallery, those folks. And Livingston L. Biddle III was the chairman of the board of that vestry, and he's the one who put up the first money. I buried Toby Biddle about 7 years ago in the courtyard of that church. The point in my sharing this with you is friends come disguised in many uniforms, but it's very important that you be receptive to them regardless of where they started out. It's where you end up that matters. So what I do with this program, I work with public school kids, most of whom are flunking out of school. I put them in an after-school arts program, clay, photography, digital imaging, called Manchester Craftsman's Guild. We graduated 99% of the kids last year from the public school system. The kids who have a 50% dropout rate are now graduating at the rate of 90%. So we've been able to double the effective graduation for these kids in 36 months. They do not become artists necessarily. That's not the point. The arts is a bridge to walk across to a new life. You can't teach kids algebra if they don't want to live. The first thing you got to do is to get them to stay on the planet. And the arts does it because it appeals to the hemisphere of the brain where the human imagination lies. You unlock the imagination, you unlock learning. That's what I figured out. So we do clay. This is all kids' work. These are all the inner city kids who supposedly have no aptitude and no ability to be creative. Well, if that's true, where'd this come from? This is a piece that kids did for the school. We did a mosaic project. We brought a woman who had studied the mosaic techniques of the Vatican, brought to Pittsburgh to teach these kids how to do that. Why? Because if you want the kids to be a part of the world, you got to bring the world there. This is a new photograph I've added. Look at that young man's eyes. That's a kid that's engaged in learning something. What I do now when I go to schools, the first thing I do when I look in the classroom, look at the kids' eyes. Most of the time they're looking out the window or at each other, but they ain't looking at a book. Here they're looking at books. This kid who took that picture is working for Walt Disney Studios. This is the gallery for the professionals and the kids. And they're world class. We do a museum quality invitation. Our culinary program does a salmon presentation at the art opening. It's as good as anything in the Museum of Modern Art in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. I even have their parents coming to the art openings. 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't get any parents. The kids would break their backs. They really worked hard. We'd have this show. None of the parents would show up. In fact, one kid asked my wife, Rose, and I if we would be his parents that evening. So I got tired of watching these kids tear up because the families wouldn't come to the shows. So I hired a guy, a buddy of mine. He got off into Jesus, saving souls for the Lord with a Bible and all that kind of stuff. I said, I want you to come work for me. Tone down the Jesus stuff, but keep the enthusiasm, man. And he said, I'll get him to come. So he took the keys to the van and went to Miss Jones's house. He said, Miss Jones, I knew you wanted to come to your kid's art opening, but you probably didn't have a ride, so I came to give you a ride. Well, we got 15 parents, 20 parents. The last show, 300 parents, and we didn't pick up one parent. And you know why? Because people want to be recognized as parents who support their kids. So if you don't show at the Manchester Craftsman's Guild art opening, people think you're a lousy parent. There's no statistical difference between white moms and black moms and Asian moms, Hispanic moms. Mothers will go where their kids are being nurtured every day of the week. On the left is the instructor, on the right is the student. We're introducing a new concept in education. It's called We Love Our Students. Very revolutionary approach. The guy on the left is Jermaine Watkins. I had this kid in 7th grade. He's now the director of the program. 8 of my faculty are former kids who went through the program, went to college, are back teaching at the center that saved their life. This is actually an old slide. I know all you computer guys are cringing looking at this slide. Well, in the old days, before I got real fancy with my little, I had a slide projector with duct tape on the corner of the box. And I ended up getting invited to a place called the Silicon Valley. So I went out on stage with my slide projector, and these people looked at me like I was from Mars, man. And I blew off the dust, plugged in a little slide projector, told the story. The lady came out here and she said, "Man, what a story. My only criticism is your computers get a little dated." I said, "Well, they don't look about the same to me. So what do you do for a living?" She said, "Oh, I help run a company called Hewlett-Packard." I said, "My dear, there's an instantaneous solution to this problem." And we got $750,000 from HP and a systems engineer to go with it. We now have one of the hippest digital imaging centers east of the Mississippi River. And I've put kids into the Rhode Island School of Design right out of the imaging center. But I keep this slide in here for nostalgia reasons, and you never know when an Apple representative might be in the audience. This is called a classroom. This is how you're supposed to treat your kids. You build that, you solve your problem. That's our music hall. I stuck a music hall on the north end of the building when I was building it, and a very famous player, a guy named Dizzy Gillespie, showed up. And I said to Dizzy Gillespie, "Why would you come to a black school in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh that doesn't even have a reputation in music?" He said, "Billy Taylor told me a black guy built this thing. I didn't believe I wanted to see for myself. And you ought to build one of these in every city in this country, and I'm going to help you do it." I said, "Well, you came here, that's enough." He said, "No, I'm going to allow you to record the concert. I'm going to give you the rights to the music," which he did. And then a guy named Herbie Hancock showed up, and then Wynton Marsalis, and all the contemporary important recordings are probably being done at our place. Those are called kids who are happy to be in school. If your kids ain't looking like that in school, there's something wrong with the school. They're looking like that when they come to my school. And those are 5 of the 6 Grammys. We did back-to-back Grammys with Nancy Wilson. 5 Point Surround Sound Studio, all digital. That's on opening night. If you'd have dropped a bomb on that room, you'd have wiped out all the rich people in Pennsylvania, because they were all sitting there, including my mother and father, who were in the left-hand side, 3rd row. They're both deceased now, but they lived long enough to see their kid build a center in the neighborhood and open it up black tie. The next night I had the neighborhood come in, same music, same food, because I wanted to establish the principle you don't have to have a tuxedo on to be treated with dignity. And I knew people would start talking about that, so we now sell out all of our concerts in subscription 3 weeks after the season's announced, in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh, in a tough neighborhood. Not one act of graffiti, violence, theft, or drugs in over 22 years. This was burned out during the riots. I pre-leased the building before I built it, which is apparently the way you're supposed to do real estate. And the thing actually makes a couple of bucks, and this is in the inner city. You want to rebuild the inner city, have it look like that. Here's the fountain, Citizens Bank's in there, and I also built a greenhouse. So that generated a strategy to raise about $6 million, which I did, and I built a greenhouse. So we now are one of the leaders in horticultural education in Pennsylvania. So I got the poor folks growing orchids. But this is part of our strategy for getting people re-engaged with learning and working again. This is at the Home and Garden Show. We took first prize. We beat out Miracle Grow, all the big guys. Now I'm down to the end of the talk, and this is where the story takes on another interesting dimension. You remember I was out there at the Silicon Valley with my little slideshow and all that? Well, this young man came out of the audience. He had tennis shoes, blue jeans, and a t-shirt. He said, man, that's quite a story. I said, cool, man. What do you do for a living? He said, oh, I built a company called eBay. I said, oh, great, man. You have a card? Remember, I ain't the techie guy. I took the guy's card and put it in my pocket. And I went back to Pittsburgh, and I pulled the card out and asked one of the little techie kids. I said, man, have you ever heard of something called eBay? He said, yeah, Mr. Strickland. That's the Electronic Commerce Network. I said, holy smokes, I met the guy that built the company. So I called him up. I said, Mr. Skull, I've come to have a much deeper appreciation of who you are, man. He said, I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. Here's $500,000. I said, what's that for? He says, your first replication. I think Dizzy was right. I think you can scale this thing. And we got these centers now open and operating. We don't own the centers. It's not a franchise. I don't want to own the centers. What I want to do is get them built. But we're all affiliated with each other. And at some point, we'll be able to exchange faculty and exchange curriculums, et cetera, et cetera. So it's becoming a movement. This is San Fran before it was fixed up. There's Mr. eBay, Jeff Skull, Billy Wong, and the kids doing digital imaging. Every space that we build is beautiful, or we will not build it. No used equipment, no used furniture. Forget it, man. You have to look like the solution and not the problem. Look at the faces of these people. Those kids are not defeated. They were defeated. Now they got a life. They turned this into a business. They charge you $10,000 to do a mural. This is one we built in Grand Rapids. A guy named Jim Welsh, a number of years ago, saw my slideshow, and he said, I believe that God is speaking through your center in Pittsburgh. I said, well, I don't know about all that, but if you want to build a school, I'm your guy. So he showed up. He said, man, this is an example of the Holy Spirit big time. I said, well, what do you want to do about it? He said, well, I want to build a center. Well, as it turns out, he's one of the heirs to the Steelcase fortune. And he and Doug DeVos, Amway, and Jim Hackett, the chairman of Steelcase, raised a pile of money, and they built this thing. That's the dining room for the kids. We cut the dropout rate in Grand Rapids to 5%. These are some of the kids in the program. One of the ways that we now know that the program is taking effect, the kids start pulling their pants up. And this is Cleveland. We trained for Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital. These are the kids. We saw kids get off the bus and walk away from the center. They thought they got off at the wrong stop. They couldn't believe something that beautiful was for them. This guy records with Alicia Keys. He developed a recording program. That's our first phlebotomy class in that facility. This is the one we built in New Haven. Looks just like that. We have our first African-American chairman of one of the boards. During the feasibility phase, Procter & Gamble bought out his company, so he went from entrepreneur to multimillionaire. His first act of philanthropy, he wrote a check for $1 million to build this center, and we made him chairman of the board. $1 million equals chairman of the board. This one we opened up in Boston, in that space. This is what every school in this country ought to look like. That's one of our graduates, and that's the first class. Everybody got a job. By the way, 80% of them, I believe, had criminal records. Look at their faces. Those aren't prisoners. These are people who now have a life. And from what I hear, they're doing okay. This is Brockway, Pennsylvania, 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. We built a center up there for poor white folks. And what we discovered is poverty is poverty. White, black, age, don't make any difference. And they responded to the program the same. This is Akko, Israel. The reason this slide is in here, we have Jews and Arabs going to school together today in Israel. for real. That's the city. It's 30 miles from the Syrian border, about 15 miles from Lebanon. It's a city that has a history of Jewish-Arab cooperation, and we built our center there, and it got me a meeting with Shimon Peres, who had heard about me being in Israel and invited me to meet him. And he said, basically, keep going, because if we can pull this off in Israel, there's the model for the Middle East. We did not do this with the State Department. We went and talked to the people in the city, the Jews and the Palestinians, with my slideshow. And I said, look, I went to the Jewish kibbutzes and the Arab villages. Your kids look exactly the same. They're just kids, man. They need a center. I believe that a lot of this can be solved with people sitting in this room who still believe in something, have some concept of right and wrong, and want to do the right thing. No one believes this is happening, but it is happening. Chicago, Sharon, Vancouver, U.S. Virgin Islands, Akko, Israel, New Haven, Buffalo, Boston, Brockway, L.A., Laurel Valley, Chester, Denver, Tacoma. And these are cities we're talking to, and these are countries we're talking to. And now we have a book out called Make the Impossible Possible. It's a pretty good book. Big type, real short. But it tells the story. Now let me wrap this up for you by saying a couple things I think that you really should know. One is I didn't make up anything in this story. If anything, I've understated the case. You ought to come see it. Any of them, any of the 8. They work, they're for real, and they can be built to scale for less money than we're spending now on our education system. In fact, about 60% of what we're spending now. In Pittsburgh, it's $24,000 a year from first grade to 12th grade to educate a kid. They have a 50% dropout rate with minority kids in the 10th grade. $250,000 goes up the smokestack. My vocational program is $13,000. My arts program is $2,500 a year per kid. 99% of them graduate. Do the math. That's where telemarketing, Tele and I connect at the hip. Because at the end of the day, from what I can gather, that's basically what you guys are doing, is figuring out more sensible ways to run the medical system, which appears to be out of control. Well, our education system is out of control too. And no politician is willing to step up and do anything about it. Why? Because they want to get reelected. So they're bought by the unions. I happen to believe in public schools. Don't leave out here thinking I don't believe in public schools, because I do. I was trained by a public school teacher. Mr. Ross would roll over in his grave if he thought that I turned my back on schools. I'm not doing that. What I'm telling you is they have to perform. They have to do what they're supposed to do and educate these kids. And we can do it for existing money. We don't need 10 cents more. In fact, we need quite a bit less than we're spending now. So it is possible, and I'm hoping that we can get 200 centers built. That will make enough of a noise to get the country moving in the right direction. Mike said, he intends to change the landscape of healthcare. I want to do the same in education. I apologize to all of you today because I have this nasal cannula in. This is the first time I've worn it publicly. And I did so because Mike Zamias encouraged me to. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's a fact of my life, that my health is deteriorated, and the plan is to get a transplant so I can build these 200 centers with my buddy Mike. The odds are that's going to happen pretty soon. I don't want to live just to be able to breathe. I want to live to change the conversation. And he and I have agreed to do that. But I wanted you to also understand or see inside of me this hot piece of steel that refuses to give up. I don't care if I'm down to my last breath. I'm going to tell this story. And we've got to change this conversation. There are a lot of people counting on me standing up here and giving this story because they can't speak for themselves. nobody speaks for them. You know, they're dying and they're suffering and they're cold and they're hungry. And they've got to have guys like me stepping up to the plate to lead the conversation. Well, you can bet on me, because that's exactly what I intend to keep doing. And let me now just turn to something that I think you may want to know or use. This work that I do is very difficult. I make it look easy because that's my job. But, you know, there's so many poor people. I have a hypersensitivity to human suffering, thanks to my mother. And I see all this suffering, and I get really discouraged, depressed. You, I understand, also get discouraged and depressed because you're very good people trying to do a right thing in a system that doesn't applaud that. So I know that you get discouraged and depressed. But there's an answer to this dilemma, which I figured out. If you make friends in every community where you go, the next time you go back, you will not be so lonely and therefore so discouraged. If I haven't done anything else here today, but add a couple of friends to the list, by my estimation, I've done my job. And thank you for being the good people that you are. Thank you.